Hello everyone, how's it going? This is Jeff bringing you a PowerPoint on entertainment rigging. I will be explaining a wide range of things here, and not for only newcomers but also for veterans, guys that have been doing this for years. There might be a thing or two that I show you here today that might have slipped your arsenal of knowledge. So if we can move on to this next slide, I'll show you what we will cover here. I broke it up into 3 units. The first one being basics, the second one being intermediate, the third one being advanced. During basics, we're going to learn 5 lessons. What is rigging? Types of rigging, rigging venues, structures, and gear. Second unit, we're going to go over stage position, bridles, hanging signs, knots, and lifts. And the third unit, we're going to go over calling bridles. We're going to go over plots. We're going to go over load in and loadouts. We're going to go over rope strength. And we're going to go over conversions. You know, when you're doing metrics to imperials or imperials to metrics. In layman's terms, that's basically when you turn feet into meters and meters into feet. Okay, let's move along. Unit 1, Lesson 1. What is rigging? Entertainment rigging is a system of equipment used to suspend and move equipment on stage or in other entertainment venues. Rigging can be used for many purposes, including hanging signs, scenery, curtains, audio equipment, speakers, microphones, LED screens, etc. Rigging can be dead hung, manually operated, or motorized. Lesson 2. We're going to go over 3 different types of rigging. On the top left is production, which basically have your truss grid, all that stuff that's floating in the air that kind of look like a bunch of ladders is called truss. That truss gets hung by motors. You get the motor and you attach it to the truss by wrapping it with gack flex. We'll go over that in a second. And from the truss you can hang what we mentioned before, audio equipment, lights, scenery, what have you. The second one we're going to go over is theater rigging. Right there in the middle, you can see it's a stage, and above it is a bunch of pipes with lights hanging on it. Those pipes are called battens. Those battens are basically on a pulley system that get pulled from the side of the stage, which is called fly rail. We don't got to get too in depth with theater rigging because this is more of the advanced guys that do theater rigging. At least where I'm stationed in Central Florida, there's not many venues that do theater rigging, but it is important to know, and it is pretty widespread and very popular up in New York and other areas on the East Coast and Los Angeles area. All right, so the top right is Exhibitors rigging. Now, Exhibitors is pretty much what you see in convention centers. They have your regular Comic Cons. You do your gun shows, your fitness shows, your fishing shows, tools, plastics. There's conventions that basically just take over halls on equipment that manufacture plastic. And there's just many shows. There's roller coaster shows. The list is endless. And Exhibitors is basically where you have a ton of booths spread out on the floor, and each booth is basically its own kind of production. Sometimes they just need a sign that gets hung, or sometimes they need a whole grid, like how the top left shows a production. Lesson 3, rigging venues. These are just some of them that I've listed here. So you'll be working in arenas, theaters, convention centers, hotel ballrooms, stadiums, festivals, cruises, tents, churches, and this is just to name a few. All right, so lesson 4, we'll go over structures. The top left is an I-beam, basically because if you cut it and you look at it straight on, it looks like a capital I. We do walk on top of these, and we do hang from these. We hang steel from these, and we wrap up signs attached to ropes off to these. The next one is an H-beam, which is basically an I-beam, but just on its side. You see how it looks like a capital H? These are also ones that you walk on. It's a little easier because you have these flanges that are on the side. You see where it says flanges, and you walk on the web. So it's a little easier to maneuver on H beams than it is on an I beam. But it's 50-50 in most places. Some of the ones that go north-south are I. Some of the ones that go east and west are H, or vice versa. So get comfortable with both of them. The third one we see here is a fall rest. See this steel line that's going across the whole bay? This is basically there to, arrest your fall. That way you don't fall down all the way. You get caught by your harness and your Y lanyard. It's called a Y lanyard because it goes from one stick and then it deploys to two different hooks up here. You can't really tell from this picture, but we'll go over that later on in the lesson. The fourth picture you see here is a catwalk. Pretty self-explanatory. I think everybody knows what a catwalk is, but this is the only way in, only way off of these beams. So get used to walking on a catwalk and get used to rigging off a catwalk, because we do hang signs and we do hang lights right off the catwalk. The last picture you see down here is an eye bolt. This is mainly in hotel ballrooms. Instead of hanging from beams, they actually drill these eye bolts into beams, and you basically just connect a hook inside of there. There's not many exposed beams in ballrooms because they have that, beautiful drop ceiling or whatever they have up there. So it's a lot easier to install some eye bolts in the ceiling instead of having exposed beams all the time. Lesson 5, we're going to go over a ton of gear. I'm sure there's many more gear that you'll come across in the rigging industry, but these are pretty important. You will see these pretty often. So anything outside of this list is probably just something rare or something that I personally just haven't really seen much of. So let's get started on some gear talk. So first one, we'll go over shackles. This basically connects anything, whether it be gag to the motor or two pieces of steel together. It's a very handy piece of equipment that you will need. They come in different sizes. They go from 5/8, ½ inch, 1/4 inch, 3/8, 5/16. There's a couple other ones, but that is the shackle. The second one here is gag flex, or galvanized aircraft cable. Now inside this wrap right here, there's a bunch of little tiny pieces of steel, just like this one, that are just looped in a circle and crimped at the middle of it. So it's just like an endless circle of cable. And this is rated to hold tons of weight, like literally tons. Like I think this one, if you look closely, it's rated to hold a little over 10,000 pounds, which equals out to about a little over 5 ton. Just a bit of background. A lot of people think that 1 ton equals 1,000, but it's actually 2,000. So, you got 20,000 pounds, that is 10 ton. All right, so let's move forward. Span sets, or softies, what we like to call them, is basically a gag flex, but instead of steel, it's actually fiber that's running through it. Believe it or not, these can hold more weight than the gag flex do. And you would ask me, Jeff, why don't we just use these on everything? Well, because God forbid if there's a fire burns through fabric. It will not burn through steel. So that's why we, mostly use gag flex. But span sets is something that we do utilize as well if there's no electricity connected to it. The fourth one here is a Verlock. These Verlocks are just a piece of steel connected to a thimble. This is called a thimble right here. This is where you connect the shackle, and then from there you could connect the sign or whatever you need to connect to it. And this little Verlock piece right here is to adjust it. So sometimes these come in 10, 15, 20, 25 feet. And if the client wants the sign to be 17 feet, well, let's grab a Verlock because it's adjustable. You can bring this all the way to 1 foot down to 25, whatever you need to bring it to. Okay, the fifth item on our list is a motor or an electric chain hoist. This is the big daddy of entertainment rigging. These get connected to the beams, they get connected to the eye bolts in hotels, and from here, chain up, you connect it to the, like I said, beam or eye bolt, and then you'll put the gack with a shackle, and then you will wrap the truss. And these are meant to hold a significant weight. They come in different sizes. This one right here is a 1/4 ton, so this is able to hold a 1/4 ton safely. But they have 1/2 tons, 1 tons, 2 tons, and most of the weight will be carried by the motor itself. You yourself as a person would just be pulling up the chain. So a lot of people see these grids and they're like, how do I get that up in the air? That's a giant truss grid with audio, video. All you got to do is pull up the chain and the motor does the rest. All right, 6th item on our list is motor cable or fly cables. This basically connects to the motor, and we run it on the truss, we tie it off, and then we connect it to our next item here, which is a motor box. But before we move on to that, just a piece of advice. You don't see the cable off of this motor here, but most of them have a little cable coming off of it, and that's where you connect this female end. This is the female end for obvious reasons, and then the male end will connect to the motor box. So we can move down to the motor box or a 6-way box with a pendant and hose. So this is a 6-way because, as you can see, there's 6 different channels here. This is how you turn them on. They turn on by 2s, and this is pretty much the pendant or controller that controls the box itself, that in turn can control the motor. A lot of these boxes don't need a pendant. They actually have, the up-down switches on the box, but this one doesn't. So it needs a pendant and a hose. This little yellow part's called a hose. Moving on to 8, this is the motor box power. So if you can see here, this is the male end, this is the female end, because you could daisy chain them, meaning like you could connect a box to another box to another box just to kind of like continuously use that power. They don't always look like this. They don't always have the 2 heads, but I couldn't find a better picture. So this is basically what you got. It'll look just like this, but just with 1 head, 1 female end, 1 male end, and it connects down here. And just for reference for the hose, it connects over here. All right, moving on. Number 9, an Edison cable. This is basically like your everyday cable that you would see at your house, what we call extension cords. It's called an Edison cable out there in the field. 10 is your truss. We've mentioned the truss a good amount already. I think you know what the truss is. It's basically the ladder grid that holds the weight for the screens or projectors, scenic pieces, or whatever you need to get hung. 11 is truss bolt. This is basically to connect 2 truss together. You see the 4 holes right here. You get the bolt and you tie it in with these truss tools, which is your standard socket wrench that you will use to tighten down these bolts. 13, harness. We went over this briefly earlier when we were going over the fall arrest. So a harness basically clips in 3 different spots, which is 1 across your chest, 1 on left leg, 1 on right leg. That's all you got to undo and do every single time you put on or take off a harness. And clip in this lanyard, and like I mentioned earlier, it's a Y lanyard because it has 1 stick of deployment pack, and then it splits into 2 separate singular lanyards to save you from a fall. Just a bit of advice on the lanyard, or a little bit of a educational piece on the lanyard. Make sure that the clip is always facing out, because if the clip is facing in and it's rubbing on your back, it can actually undo itself. So watch out for that. This little pack over here is called a deployment pack, meaning if you take a fall, it's not just a hard shock load that keeps you bouncing in the air. This thing will break apart. There's a bunch of little I'm not sure how to really explain that, but it's a bunch of stitching that just breaks apart as you fall, and then this thing breaks apart another like 6 feet. So the reason why you have 2 of them is that you're always tied off. So let's say you're on a I-beam with this hook and you're walking down the line, and then you got to reach an intersection, and you have to, unclip this. Well, good thing you have a second lanyard. You clip into the next one, and then now you can safely unclip the next one. So that's the harness. Number 14, this is tie line, which is basically just a tiny, small strand of rope that you tie off cables with. On the truss, you tie cables to coil them and put them away. It's used a lot just to tie things off safely. 15 over here is the wired rope, or what we call just steel. They come in 5 foot, 10 foot, 15 feet, 20 feet. 25 is rare, but I've seen it. 30 is rare, but I've seen it. And this is basically what you use to create bridles in the air. And bridles we're going to cover a little more later on. 16 is your fiber rope, your 3-strand poly. Now these come in a 12.5 millimeter, which is half an inch, or 5/8, whatever you're more comfortable with. And these are meant to pull the chains, or you can hang signs and tie off to the beam. Very, very important to always have a rope. Always. You always need a rope on you if you're going to be a rigger. All right, moving on. Burlap, 17. Burlap you kind of just put on the beam. That way you can safely put the steel on the beam, because once the steel or the bridle takes weight, you don't want to have that steel on steel. So the burlap is just to kind of create a little bit of that cushion on the beam. That way it's not steel on top of steel with a ton of weight. Moving on, 18, black strap. We use these to hang signs. It's usually about 1 foot long. So if you need that extra foot, or if you need to connect something to something else and you just need an extra foot, well, that's what a black strap is there for. This thing can hold significant amount of weight too. They all have different ratings on it. But just remember, as we mentioned earlier, if you're hanging anything with this, make sure there's no electric, because God forbid there's a fire. This black strap will not save you and become a hazard. All right, 19, cheese burrow. Pretty self-explanatory. You connect one side to the truss, and that way you can connect either another truss to truss, or you can connect a pipe to the truss, because we do hang off of pipes as well. All right, 20, endless ratchet strap. This is a monster of a piece of equipment that can hold significant amount of weight. One of these could hold a Titanic if it wanted to. Probably not, but it can hold a lot of weight. Now, this thing is to basically secure the truss cart. Sometimes we have these stacks of truss on top of each other, and basically on a dolly, and that's where we strap them down with this endless ratchet strap. Or if you want to marry a truss to a truss, kind of like how the cheese burrow was doing, you can also do that as well. But like I said before, keep in mind, fire, no good. All right, the last two here, 21 is a deck chain. This will just give you the extra length on a bridle. Let's say you just need 6 inches. You can't throw another 5 foot on there, or a 2 foot, or a 1 foot. No, you need those 6 inches. Each link equals 3 inches. So this thing just gives you the extra inches when it comes to building bridles. And last and not least, right here we got the hard hat, which is pretty self-explanatory. I mean, you don't want anything dropping on your head, so you want to invest in a hard hat. I personally have this Petzl one, and just make sure it has a chin strap, because if you're climbing and you have a hard hat, you don't want it to fly off of you. And that pretty much covers our gear. Okay, so moving on to Unit 2. In this unit, we're going to learn these 5 lessons, which is stage position, bridles, hanging signs, knots, and lifts. So, lesson 1, stage positions. Now, basically, we're going to call a lot of stage calls on stage whenever we're trying to call for a downrigger or even an uprigger. If you're a downrigger telling your up guys, hey, we're moving stage left, you need to know where stage left is. And if you got an up guy that's screaming down, hey, can you check this point on, downstage? The down guy wouldn't need to know downstage. So if you look on this left diagram, this is just stage position calls, which is, upstage right, upstage center, upstage left, stage right, center stage, stage left, downstage right, downstage center, downstage left. A lot of times we'll just go off of this diagram on the right. I did draw this. I know it looks like my 3-year-old daughter drew it, but I'm not in the business to make and sell art. So this is a good diagram to look at as a reference, because whenever you're calling stage positions, you got to pretend that you're the artist on stage. So pretend you're the artist facing the audience, right? On your left will be stage left. On your right will be stage right. Now, I used to get confused about upstage, downstage. Sometimes I look at the view of an artist and I'm like, that would be upstage, going forward. No, upstage is behind you. And the reason they did that is because back in the Shakespearean days, the stage was actually on an incline, like a ramp. So that's a good way to remember stage left, stage right, upstage, downstage. So moving forward, on the bottom half of this diagram, there's these yellow circles where it's basically the opposite of what stage positions are. These are house positions. So this is if you're in the audience looking at the artist. So if somebody says, hey, I got a point you got to check on house left, well, you got to go to the left of the house. House right, front of house, back of house. So remember that. It's the opposite. When you're on stage, this is stage left, stage right, upstage, downstage. When you're in the audience, then you could call house. So house left, house right, back of house, front of house. Moving on. Bridles. This is something we're going to talk about a lot, especially if you're in arenas or convention centers or any hotel ballroom that has open, exposed beams. Now, these are your beams right here. And this is basically how you make a bridle. You basically marry two pieces of steel because the point that you're trying to hit is in between these beams. Now, if it was right under this beam, perfect. It's a dead hang. But these are not directly underneath the beam, so you have to call a bridle. So this top half of the bridle, the one that actually like hugs the beam, is called a basket. Basket on this side, basket on this side. These are your bridle legs, and then where they meet, this shackle right here, that's called the apex, and that's where the hook gets hooked onto. So as you can see here, there's a ton of bridles in the air, all these different legs that you see, and then these are the apex where the two legs marry. So just to go off these bullet points real quick, bridles are used to suspend loads between beams. Adjusting the length of the bridle legs allows a rigger to hit any point between the beams. They comprise of making up a basket around the beam, then comes to the bridle legs, then they join at the apex, then the down leg or stinger, if they want more length, then the hook and chain. Moving on. This diagram looks a bit confusing, but let's start off from left to right. So let's go off of this thing first, right? This is how they usually draw with chalk on the floor. And, if we go back, we can see that this would be the basket. The 5 is the basket. The 10 is the down leg. Same thing on the right side. The 5 is the basket. The 20 is the down leg. Whenever you see this plus and a number, that means how many deck chain links. Like I mentioned earlier, if you need an extra 6 inches, that can be two links. An extra 9 inches, 3 links, whatever it is. And then when they draw 20 down here, that just means a stinger. So remember that. Basket, basket, leg, leg, apex. And then if there's a number right here, then it'll be the stinger. So we'll go back to that one again. Basket, basket, leg, leg, apex, right? So this is how they usually draw it. And this is just how you kind of build it on the floor. Like I said, not in the business of being an artist. But this is how you would lay it out. Before connecting any shackles, you want to lay out your steel first. So you would throw the steel on the natural curve that it gives and on both sides. That's what I do first. Throw the 5-foot basket down first, and then throw your 10-foot steel, and then your 20-foot steel, and then your stinger, and then you start working with the shackles. So let's look at this red writing that's right here. So this will be your basket. These little drawings right here will be your burlap. They usually go right in through the thimble. And then you got two different shackles here. This is important. They're usually built like this. Two different shackles. This is your load, your load shackle. You know, the bottom one, that's actually going to hold the weight. That's why it's a load shackle. And this is your working shackle. This one right here will be your working shackle, because this is the one that you're going to undo in the air and, you know, connect back to the load shackle. This is your working shackle. This doesn't take weight like that. At least not when you're making up the basket up there on the beam. And when we come down here, these are your links. Let's say if they wanted 3 links, you're gonna give them these 3 links, and then the last 4 will be floating. That's why I put floating links, and then these are your working links, because they're the ones that are gonna be doing the job. And then this is your stinger. So take a screenshot of this. I know it's a little sloppy, but this is the best way to kind of build it on the floor. And I put an arrow because this is where you tie your rope. You put it in through the load shackle, right in there. Don't tie it to the working shackle, because once they pull it up, they're going to undo this pin, and then the rope could slide out. The whole load is going to fall. So very important to know how to build and work with bridles. All right, these are your hanging signs. There's a couple of different ones out there. You got your square ones, your rectangle ones, your triangle ones, you know, your circle ones. Sometimes you get these flatter signs that require you to put in a pipe, you know, on the top and bottom of it. You know how we talked about two-way bridles? There's actually bridles that you do on the sign itself. So this is a 4-way bridle. Sometimes they got 3-way bridles, you know, 5-way bridles. You know, see this one right here is a square sign. Every corner is gonna have a little eye bolt, so it's gonna get a 4-way bridle. Splay lines is something that we go over a good amount when we're hanging signs. It's basically these 2 lines right here, whether it be tie line or any type of rope, just to keep it from spinning. Because if you just hang a sign from a single point, you know, naturally it might go with the memory of the steel and start rotating a certain way, and you don't want, you know, signs just rotating out in the air. And especially since these clients are paying good money to hang these signs, they want it facing a certain way all 3 days of the show. So this is where these 2 lines come in. You tie it off to 2 legs, and you kind of just adjust it in the air and tie it off where they want it. They sometimes have rotators as well. Rotating signs are going to require nothing but steel, because, you know, a rotator device is electric, and as we mentioned multiple times, it could cause a fire. And same thing down here, signs with electric. You could tell that this sign has lights in it, so this is also no good if it's getting hung by rope. It has to be all steel, all the way to the beam. Moving on. All right, these are your knots. We're going to go over 3 knots here. First one is the bowline. Look at this diagram. It's pretty specific, but it could get confusing. So I actually will demonstrate with a video that I recorded right here. All right, guys, I'm going to show you the bowline knot. This is the knot that we use more than anything. So get used to it, find your groove, your most quickest, most efficient way to make it up and undo it, because there's some days where you have to do this knot 100, 200 times during a call. So this is what it looks like. We're looking at one end of the rope, and right here's the rest of the rope, right? I just created a loop. Right? Sometimes you're gonna make these 3 feet long, and then sometimes you're just doing a quick little one. But this is what it looks like. So this is how I do it. I get the tail, you know, maybe 6 inches of the tail in my 2 index and middle finger, and I lay the other half of the rope across my palm. So what I do is when I come towards the top of it, I kind of create this loop. See that? And kind of create this loop. And then we just go around the tree, back inside the bunny hole. And what you want to make sure is that we're leaving at least 6 inches of tail and make sure that this loop is going around the tree, back in the bunny hole, and the tail's in the middle of the whole loop. Make sure it's not like this on the outside. Make sure it's always in the middle of the loop. I'm gonna do that one more time. And this is how you undo it. The reason why this knot is so great is because no matter how much weight is on it, it's very easy to undo. You just pull over here, and then you just take out the tail and undo it. Very easy knot to make and break. Let me do it again, ready? So like I said, between the two fingers, across my palm, and then you kind of create this loop action. Go around the tree, into the bunny hole. All right, hope you enjoyed that. Next one we're gonna go over is the Clove hitch, which is an essential knot. It's pretty good, you know, drawing diagram is pretty understandable, but just in case you need a visual reference on how it's done, here is the next video right here. Okay guys, so here is the demonstration for the Clove hitch. Usually you do this around pipes, and it's not too hard to do, and that's why we use it. You know, we're not trying to do crazy knots, we're trying to use effective knots. And this knot is unique because it gets, the heavier the load is, the tighter the knot gets. So it's a constricting knot, and this is the Clove hitch. You lay it over the pipe, and you come around the pipe one time and create like an X. You see this X right here, right? And what you do is when you go over the pipe the second time, you go through the hole of the last strand that you just put over. That's how the Clove hitch should look like. And this is just a clove part, and then the hitch comes right here. You kind of just do like a quick little knot. So let me demonstrate that one more time. So like I said, you go over, go around the pipe one time, and usually what people do is that they see this hole already, and that's where they usually put the rope, but that's not the Clove hitch. This is not going to hold anything. You could try it. As soon as it takes weight, it will undo itself. So what you do is, once the rope is over, you go over a second time, and you go through the hole of the last strand you just put over. That is the Clove hitch. And you just do a regular little loop here. And that's the Clove hitch. Okay, hope you enjoyed that one. The last one we're going to go over here is the butterfly knot. Before we get into the butterfly knot, I put choke right here because everybody should know what a choke is. It's basically when you get a black strap, put it around something, and then choke it in the loop that it comes with. Pretty easy. I mean, there's nothing to really show or explain with a choke, but let's go back to the butterfly. I also have a video to demonstrate that as well right here. Okay, here is the demonstration for the butterfly. Now we use the butterfly mainly to marry two ropes together to create bridles. We call rope bridles, but this is how you do it. You got the rope. It doesn't matter where in the rope you do it, right? You don't really necessarily need the tail to do the butterfly, so we'll get rid of the tail. We'll go up a few feet. This is also good for when you're climbing a rope, putting all your weight on the rope, and you want to isolate a tear. If there's a tear in the rope, you want to not put your weight on it. So what you do, lay it across your palm, and you twist it once. You put your finger inside the hole, you know, give it a little. And then once you twist it again, you come bring the loop to your palm, right? And then where your finger is, your middle finger, that's where the loop has to go to. It looks very confusing, first time seeing it, but you know you got it right when it basically looks like this, like a little butterfly. So like I said, if you're putting weight on the rope and there's a tear, this is a good way to isolate it because no more weight is on this rope. That's the alpine butterfly. I'll do it one more time. You pull the ears back to take it apart. Right? One more time. Lay it across your hand. Put your finger in the loop, and then you kind of, like I said, twist it in the same direction. Bring the end of the loop to your palm, under. You see how I'm going under everything and going where my middle finger is? You go under everything and tighten the two ends, and that right there is your butterfly. All right, now we're getting close to the end. So lesson 5, we'll talk about lifts. You got 2 lifts that you deal with: the scissor lift, which is basically your bucket that you stand in and operate from, and then you have a boom lift, which is basically articulated arms that can bend in many different directions to give you different angles to get to a point. And same thing, you will be in this bucket up here. All right, so the scissor lift controller is pretty standard. It's pretty easy to memorize. This red button is a dead man, meaning if you press it, it will stop immediately on the dime. You know, this is just for emergencies, and it should just be used as such. So the way you go forward is there's a button behind this little joystick that you gotta press, and then you can move forward and move back. So that's how you move the wheels forward and back. These 2 buttons you see on top right here, this is how you go left and right. So it's called bump steering. You gotta bump it a few times. You don't want to be the type of person that just presses on the left button and the wheels never stop turning until you let go of it. So we recommend to always bump steer. Just tap it a few times, even if you have to tap it, 10, 15 times to get the right angle of left if you're going left. So this little yellow switch, if it's on the left side, then if you go up and down with the joystick, the bucket will go up and down, as you can see there. You can't really see because the yellow switch is in the way, but that's basically pointing up and down for the bucket. But if you switch it to the right side, it shows the wheels and then forward and left. So it's pretty self-explanatory. If you switch it to that side and you press forward on the joystick, the whole machine will move forward like a car. All right, so boom lift. It might take a little time to really get to know this machine. It's very alarming at first. It's very intimidating, but when you get the hang of it, it's really not too bad. If anything, you would rather prefer to be in a boom lift because of how cool it is. It's like a little video game. So just to go over quick things here, this one is just like this joystick. You go forward, left, and you bump steer. So you bump steer, so wheels will turn left and right, and then forward, the wheels will go forward and back. This one is to move the whole it's called a chassis. It's to move this whole bottom base, this joystick right here, left and right. And these arms right here, all these little switches, they show little diagrams on what they do. So this one turns the basket kind of left and right. It's not going to do anything else to any of the other arms. It's literally just going to turn this basket in like a 45-degree angle left and right. This one is to basically move this arm. Actually, I think it's this arm. Yeah, this arm. So if you press up on it, this arm is going to keep rising. This part right here. This one, they don't have the button, but this is just to, telescope. If it had it, this little orange piece will extend out. This one is to move the top part, this arm. And then this one is to telescope. So you see right here, there's a little break. It'll telescope out a little. So very cool. A lot of different buttons, but they all get utilized if you're trying to hit a difficult spot to reach. Okay, last unit. This is our advanced one. So first we want to go over something that we were mentioning earlier, which is calling bridles. This is the math to call bridles. This is the last video. You don't have to watch this one. It is kind of lengthy, and if it gets a little confusing, rewatch it if you have to, or just skip it entirely because it's more of a advanced kind of thing once you're doing the math to create the bridles for booths or production site. So here's the video right here if you want to check it out. All right, guys, so this is calling bridle points. Usually you don't do this anytime in the beginning. It takes a while until you start calling points and chalking the floor. But it's pretty good to know early on, just so you can get your hands on whenever the opportunity does come up. So when I say calling points, as we talked about before, we're looking at bridles, right? Let's say the lead puts this on the ground, right? which is, 5 steel basket going over the beam, down to a 10 steel. This is the apex, and 20 steel, and then 5 steel for the basket to go around the beam, and 3 links for the deck chain. So what we want to know is, how did they get there? How did you get these numbers, right? So let's bring it back to an empty floor. Let's say we are at a booth. This is the booth, right? And these are the 2 beams up in the air, right? And this is us. Let me draw a little hard hat, safety first. And let's say, for example, point is right here, right? Because that's usually how they label the points. And we're trying to figure out, how can we get a chain to hit this spot? So you need to grab 2 things first. You want to grab the height of the hook and the distance the point is from the beam. So let's say, for example, the beam itself is 60 feet, right? The span from the beam to the beam is 20 feet, right? What we want to grab is where the hook height is going to be. Let's say we're going to drop the hook height to 40 feet, right? So we want the hook at 40 feet. So pretty simple. You know that we need to get right here, right? We need to get those 2 steels to bridle to hit this hook at 40 feet, correct? So what we're trying to see is what the distance is from here and what the distance is from here. You see where a triangle comes into play? Same thing on this side. We want to catch the distance from here to here. Now we have 2 right triangles. This is where the Pythagorean theorem comes in, which is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. But in this, we're going to say horizontal squared plus vertical squared equals leg, because this is a leg. So we'll call this h1. Sorry, that's my bad. Vertical 1, horizontal 1, leg 1, and then this one will be horizontal 2, vertical 2, leg 2. I'm just gonna do this for one side, just demonstration purposes. So like I said, the 2 things you want is the hook height and the distance from the point to the beam. So let's say on this side, the point to the beam, because we drop a measuring tape on the floor and we drop a laser on the beam. So let's say the beam ends right here. So the distance from here to here, 5 feet, right? So since it's a 20-foot span, we know that the distance from here to the next beam is 15 feet, right? So now look, we have 1 of each side. So horizontal 1 is going to be 5. And then horizontal 2 is 15, right? Now, the vertical is pretty simple because you're grabbing it from the beam as well. So the beam to the hook, because it's 40 feet, so we're not going to throw 40 right there, but the beam to the hook, not the floor to the hook, the beam to the hook. If they're looking for a 40-foot hook height and the beam is 60 feet from the ground, that's easy. That's 20 feet, right? 20 feet from the beam. Because if the floor is here and 40 feet is here, then 60 feet will be the beam, right? I hope I'm not losing you. So floor is 0, hook is 40 feet, beam is 60 feet. So beam to hook, 20 on each side. So yay, we have 2 sides, right, of each right triangle. So we got the 20, we got the 5, and on this side we have the 15, and we have the 20, right? So we do them one at a time. So let's say 20 squared plus 5 squared equals whatever, that one is. This is, I think, 400 plus this is 25 equals, and you can just throw this all into a calculator just like that. So let's say we're looking for the square root of 400 plus 25 would be 20.6. I don't know if you can see that, 20.6. So like I said, you could throw the whole equation up top, right? Or you can do the math, which is 420, 400 plus 25, which if you just square root that, 425 20.6. So you could do either. You could add the two and get the number, right? And then all you have to do is square root the number, which will equal 20.6. Or like I said, you could throw the whole equation into the square root. So we know that L1 equals 20.6, right? Now let's look at the other side, just to do the quick math. So if H2 is 15, V2 is 20, that is 15 squared plus 20 squared equals L2. So 15 squared is 225 plus, sorry, I need to throw that in there. Plus 20 squared is 400, right? Like I said, you could throw this whole thing into the calculator. So it's the square root of 225 plus 400 will equal up to 25. So this will equal 25. So now we know L2 equals 25. A little bit confusing first looking at it, but now we have all of our sides, which, like I said before, the dotted lines are just to calculate what the leg is going to be. These dotted lines are not going to exist when you create the bridle, because you're looking for the leg. So now you know on this side it's going to be 20.6, and on this side it's going to be 25. You can stop it right here if you want to, but you know, just to take note. But though that's what both of the equations would be on each side, just to figure out these two legs. And then at that point you would have to figure out what steel you would need to make 20.6 and what steel you would need to make 25. And that, my friends, is how you call bridles.
All right. Pretty intense. That bridle stuff is pretty cool to learn. You could practice with different numbers and different heights and have fun with it. All right, so next thing we're going to go over is plots. I don't want to get too crazy with plots, but this would be kind of like a standard plot of like a ballroom, for example. Sometimes they have measurements and heights and, you know, weights of lights. But this is just something that I just grabbed off of Google. So let's say, for example, this is a beam right here, right? And then this is a beam on the diagram. And, you know, they got different beams kind of set up here. It's kind of weird to look at this one. But we'll just go off of these two downstage truss. These little red circles will be your motor points. You know, so let's say we got 6 motors. What I want to go over here is kind of just a game plan. So let's say if it's a 6 motor show, you got a upstage truss and a downstage truss. And let's say this is a stage right here. What you want to do is power it on one side. That way, when you got to bring a lift in and take the power back down, it's not on the stage because it's going to be in the air. You can't get a lift on the stage to go grab the cables now. So you want to park it off to, you know, stage left or stage right, whatever will be easier for you to power it for the loadout. And you kind of just have to run the fly cables to the motors. So let's say if your box is right here, your 6-way box that we mentioned earlier, you know, you could easily do like a 25-foot cable here, but this one you might have to calculate a little more. You know, if this is 40 feet and you need 20 feet of drop, because when the truss goes to the air, you know, you're gonna need that 25-30 feet, then you would have to add those two numbers together. So if you need the 30-foot drop and you need to run like 40 feet, you got to grab at least 70 feet of cable. So a 75 would work for this one. And then let's say this one is, you know, 40 feet away from this motor. So you would have to add that as well. You know, so the first one will get 30, the second one will get 75, and the third one will get like 125 or something. Or, you know, you could put some cables together to make it all the way to the end. So that's just kind of something I wanted to go over. Obviously, these plots can get hectic and they can get very confusing. So you got to make sure that you're utilizing the gear that you have in a timely and efficient manner, because the last thing you want to do is call out another truck to come into the site because you ran out of fly cables or motors or, you know, gag flex because you just burned it through the first half of the gig. So that's just a quick little overview on plots. Lesson 3. Let's say we're doing a production together. This would basically be the checklist of A through Z of how production would go. Just a load in, and then you kind of reverse it on the loadout. So first, you load in the gear into the room or booth. And, we talked about looking at the plot, call bridles if needed, build bridles, and drop motors on the floor. So once you see these motors on the floor in a pile of chains, somebody can go around and start hanging these motor chains, whether it be with a scissor lift, a boom lift, or if we got beam walkers that are pulling up chain. And then once all the chains pulled up, we connect power to the power box, and then we run fly cables, which is the motor cables. So we're running the motor cables to the power box on the floor, with the motors kind of floating at the moment. Oh, wait, no, you float the motor, sorry, the next step. And then you lay out the truss, and then you bolt it. That's step 8. So once the motors are floating, you have room to bring the truss and start bolting all the truss. And then you wrap the truss with the gag and shackles, and you connect the motor to the truss, and then you dress up all of the cables and tie line it off to the top of the truss. And then you press buttons to float the truss to working height, which is basically at your chest. And this is basically the height that the AV will hang their screens, audio, lights, scenic, whatever they have to hang. So riggers are on standby when AV is doing this. And we're also on standby if AV has to cable and test all of their equipment. So we just kind of work as they work. Once they're done with a truss, we go raise it or move it up and down or work with audio. We're still needed during standby, but this is a good chunk of where what we call AV is eating. So you float the truss and AV is eating for a while because they're the ones that are kind of like working. And step 13, you bring the truss to trim, which is the final height, 25 feet, 20 feet, and then you level it with a disto, which is basically it's like a measuring device, but it shoots a laser and it will tell you, how many feet. So it's a good way to level truss with a laser. And then step 14, final step, would be unplugging all the power, collecting all the gear, and putting it off to the side and remembering where you put it, because the loadout, you're going to reverse these steps. So you'll bring the truss back down from trim. AV will disconnect and take off all of their stuff, and then we start working. We start bringing down the truss, unwrapping the truss, running out the chain of the motors, collecting the power, and basically just reversing all of these steps. Okay, lesson 4, we're going to talk about rope strength, and I'm not going to go in detail with this. You could just look at these diagrams, and it basically just tells you the rope strength on the left side, and then the wire rope strength, which is the steel that we talked about making bridles, on the right side. So screenshot that if you need to. And final lesson would be conversions, metrics, and imperial units. So there's only 4 numbers you got to really memorize here. When it comes to meters, feet, or feet to meters, we're going to try to memorize the magic number, which is 3.28. And centimeters to inches or inches to centimeters, you're going to memorize 3937. So 0.3937. Kilonewtons to pounds. Kilonewtons is a measurement of force. So it's like when something takes a shock load, that's a kilonewton. And that is 225. And lastly, we'll have to remember kilograms to pounds, which is 2.2. A very good trick that got me through a lot of headache on remembering, when do you multiply, when do you divide, is when you're going from metric to imperial, you multiply M to M. I mean, if you start with an M, then you got to use an M. So if you start with metric, you're going to use multiplication. And metric is your meters, your centimeters, your millimeters, your kilonewtons, and your kilograms. So if you ever start with any of those, you're gonna multiply, and then the opposite would be divide. So play around with those numbers. Try to give yourself an equation like, if I have 50 feet, how many meters is that? If I have 200 centimeters, how many inches is that? If I'm looking at 1100 kilonewtons, how many pounds is that? Just play around with it. It's a very cool thing to do, to memorize as well. We live in the States, so we're not going to use a whole ton of metric units, but it's very important to learn, because you do get plots from, overseas, and you start looking at these numbers and you're just like, why is there, so many of this number? And you're like, oh, okay, because they were using metric units. But that pretty much wraps up the whole curriculum here. Hope you guys enjoyed. Welcome to the club. It's a very nice industry to be a part of. It's great. It's blessed me. I love every aspect of it. I've seen a lot. I've done a lot. Got certified in a few things, and I still feel like pretty green. I still feel like I learn something new every day. And I just want to leave you with this last thing: is ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. We rather have one guy asking 100 questions than you not asking any questions and making a critical mistake that can cause any type of harm to others. So that wraps up this curriculum. And like I said, hope you guys enjoyed and have a great remainder of your day.